Dragi prijatelji i prijateljice iz gaming zajednice, dobrodošli na prvi ikad SGA Assemble, javni deo SGA Skupštine. Moje ime je Maša Milutinović i ja sam osoba iza SGA kanala na društvenim mrežama koja se dopisuje sa vama i ostavlja vam srce na objavama. A danas ću vas voditi kroz SGA Assemble program. Pre nekoliko sati naši članovi, kojih sada ima skoro 100, na redovnoj godišnjoj skupštini izabrali su novi upravni odbor SGA i postavili temelje na kojima ćemo raditi u periodu koji dolazi. A ovaj javni deo poklon je svima vama koji ste sa nama bili i podržavali nas prethodne 3 godine. Tako da uzmite piće po sopstvenom izboru i udobnosti svog doma ili kancelarije, uživajte u narednih sat vremena, tokom kojih ćemo vam premijerno predstaviti rezultate najnovijeg izveštaja, podeliti neke od najvećih uspeha koje su naši članovi postigli prethodne godine i najaviti programe i inicijative koje nam tek predstoje. Pored toga, spremili smo uzbudljive trejlere domaćih igara, kao i 2 specijalna Keynote predavanja. Na samom početku sa nama je Kristina Janković, za koju slobodno možemo da kažemo da je najprepoznatljivije lice SGA, osoba koja je tu od samog početka i vaša adresa za sva pitanja. Osim što je znate kao Kris SGA, ona je naša izvršna menadžerka, a danas će nam predstaviti najnovije rezultate iz godišnjeg izveštaja na kom smo radili od početka godine. Kris.
Ćao Mašo, hvala ti puno na divnom uvodu i drago mi je što si i ti sa nama danas i što za razliku od do sada, kako si rekla da sam ja kao prepoznatljivo lice, imamo nekog da delimo stage sa njim, a i stvarno sjajno radiš sve ono što si rekla, pogotovo to lupanje srca. Drago mi je što sam tu danas da predstavimo ovaj godišnji izveštaj na kojem smo radili proteklih meseci, odnosno od početka ove godine. Čisto pre nego što pređemo na samu prezentaciju da damo neki kontekst zašto se ti izveštaji dešavaju. Rešili smo da ih pravimo još kada je osnovana SGA u martu pre 3 godine. Eto, sada slavimo i tu trogodišnjicu. Čisto da bismo pokazali i konačno na neki konkretan način izmerili šta se to sve dešava u gamingu, koliko studija postoji i koliko igara, koji je revenue, to je naravno ono što zanima ljude ne samo naravno i kod nas, nego i publishere, investitore i sve druge koji bi hteli da pomognu našim timovima da izađu na globalno tržište. Stoga, eto, tako su nastali ovi izveštaji i pred nama je 3. izveštaj. Sada bih vam u jednoj prezentaciji pokazala koji su to nalazi i koji su tačni brojevi iz najnovijeg izveštaja. Ovde vidimo prikaz generalno godine i nekih najvažnijih informacija. Stvar na koju smo definitivno najviše ponosni je upravo ova prva brojka koja prikazuje procenjenu ukupnu zaradu gaming industrije koja je u toku 2020. godine bila čak 120 miliona evra, da preciziramo, i imamo ovde neki pregled drugih informacija koje ćemo malo kasnije vidjeti detaljnije. Po našoj proceni ima nekih 120 timova, kompanija i studija koji u Srbiji rade na igrama. Što se tiče zaposlenih, ima nešto više od 2000, tačnije više od 2100 zaposlenih, od toga 1/3 su žene. Ovo nam je posebno draga informacija zato što nas svrstava u top 3 države u Evropi po ovoj statistici. Platforma koja je najviše zastupljena je i dalje mobile i koja naravno donosi najveće parče ovog revenua od 120 miliona koji smo spomenuli i napravljene su 41 igra, je napravljena. Ovde vidimo malo detaljniji prikaz kompanija. Drago mi je što imamo posebno ovu mapu na kojoj se vidi da naši članovi zaista dolaze iz različitih gradova u Srbiji. Naravno, najveći hubovi su Beograd i Novi Sad, što je nekako očekivano, ali drago nam je da vidimo da su tu i Leskovac, Vrnjačka Banja, Pančevo, Zemun. Možete sve to detaljnije gledati u izveštaju kada izađe, reći ćemo na kraju kada je to. Ono što je neka ključna informacija je da više od 60% naših članova rade na razvoju originalnih IP-eva, odnosno svojih igara, što je možda suprotno onome što bismo pretpostavili. Verovatno većina ljudi kada se kaže gaming u Srbiji pomisle na ono što je situacija i u ostatku IT zajednica, a to je da se uglavnom radi outsourcing. Mnogo mi je drago što to nije slučaj kod nas. Ovde je malo detaljniji prikaz ove situacije sa ukupnim prihodima o kojoj sam pričala. Nećemo sad ulaziti u neke sve ove detalje, ali voljela bih da istaknem da postoji stvarno dosta kvalitetnih studija sa spremnim igrama kojima je u suštini samo potrebna dobra investicija i dobar publisher. Ukoliko se odluče za taj korak, investicije koje će tražiti naši uglavnom srednji studiji naredne godine su između 100 i 500 hiljada evra. Nekih 30% naših članova grubo će tražiti tu vrstu investicija. Nadamo se da ćemo moći da im pomognemo u tome. Malo da zaronimo i u same igre. Objavljena je 41 igra prošle godine, naravno najviše za mobile i PC. Onaj meni nekako najdraži podatak možda iz ovog segmenta je da je trenutno u procesu izrade 51 igra. Tako da očekujemo da ovaj broj bude još veći naredne godine. Ovo su neki detalji koji se više tiču toga koliki su timovi koji prave igre, koliko dugo rade na njima. Sve to možete pogledati detaljnije u izveštaju kada bude izašao. Šta čini našu industriju, a to su zaposleni, svi talentovani ljudi iz stvarno najrazličitijih sfera koji se bave gamingom kod nas. Po najnovijem našem istraživanju 1431 osoba radi u gamingu. Vidimo od toga koliko su stranci, koliko ima žena, već smo malo ranije pričali o tome. I ono što bih opet istakla kao najvažnije je da naši studiji planiraju da u toku ove godine, 2021. zaposle još dodatnih 350 ljudi, što mislim da je sjajno. Ako malo dublje pogledamo u ovu ekosistem stranu, tu smo više hteli da pitamo naše članove šta im možda otežava poslovanje, šta bi im pomoglo da brže prave igre i zaista neki problemi, onako broj 1, 2 i 3 koji se navode, je uvek neka velika količina birokratije, naravno manjak sredstava i dvostruko oporezivanje sa Amerikom. Sve su ovo stvari za koje se nadamo da će u budućnosti da se promene i one zaista najviše otežavaju posao ovim manjim studijima koji možda nisu toliko vični u ovom biz dev delu. Nadamo se da će u Srbiju stići i podrška za konzole. Naravno, ne tema koju bismo možda volili da zaobiđemo, ali zapravo su naši nalazi o ovome dosta zanimljivi, pa smo odlučili da ih objavimo i podelimo sa svima. A to je kako je tačno ova pandemija i prethodna godina uticala na naše timove. Vrlo nam je drago da čujemo da u velikom broju slučajeva nije uticala, što znači da nisu imali problema da nađu financije, nisu morali da nešto preterano menjaju način rada, već su nekako po defaultu naviknuti na remote rad, odnosno mogli su lako da se prebace. Rad na projektima je donekle usporen, ali nismo videli da je bilo preterano otkazanih projekata ili nekih neobjavljenih naslova koji su bili zakazani. Tako da eto, čim izađe izveštaj možete malo detaljnije gledati šta je tačno bio problem, a šta nije. I naravno, ovo je isto nešto što je moglo da se desi samo ove godine, a to je da ispratimo trendove od kada mi vršimo istraživanja, a to je od 2017. Tu ćete moći da uporedite sve neke najvažnije informacije, a to je broj zaposlenih, koliko ima studija zapravo koji prave igre, kolika je bila ukupna zarada i koliko je objavljeno igara. Sve ove prve 3 statistike koje sam nabrojala su rasle proteklih godina, odnosno iz godine u godinu, svake godine. Osim ovog broja igara, ali mislim da to ne treba preterano da nas brine, da je to u stvari na neki način i dobar znak, da se igre prave pametnije, da se prave ozbiljnije igre za koje je potrebno više vremena, više financija, veći broj članova tima, tako da mislim da to ne treba da vas brine ako na prvi pogled izgleda da ima manje igara. Podsjećam, naši studiji planiraju da završe 51 igru naredne godine. U izveštaju će se takođe naći i prikazi naših svih članova, njihovih studija, kao neki portfolio deo gde smo hteli da na jednom mestu prikupimo informacije o njihovim projektima i da vidimo šta se to kod njih dešava, tako da tu će biti dosta zadržaja koji možete da pregledate. Za razliku od prethodnog izveštaja gde smo više dali akcenat na neke ekspert intervjue vodećih stručnjaka u gamingu iz nekih većih kompanija, u ovom izveštaju hteli smo da damo prostora i nekim indie kreatorima, manjim studijima, da prikažemo šta to sve postoji u Gaming Srbiji, a da nije samo rad na igrama, to mogu biti izrade trailera, playable adsa, tako da zaista smo hteli da i njima damo neku platformu da se prikažu, tako da ćemo uz neke uvodne tekstove o industriji generalno imati i gostujuće članke studija koji rade neke zanimljive stvari, poput ovog našeg člana Spring Onion koji radi trailere. Takođe u izveštaju možete pogledati i sve ove statistike mnogo detaljnije o kojima sam ja danas pričala i vrlo bitna informacija, premijerno ceo izveštaj možete čitati na našem sajtu www.sga.rs od 5. aprila. Nadam se da će vam biti zanimljivo i sigurna sam da ćete saznati dosta stvari koje ovako možda niste znali i neke možda koje su kontraintuitivne. Eto, Mašo, nadam se da si i ti naučila nešto iz ove kratke prezentacije.
Hvala Kris na ovom sneak peeku u godišnji izveštaj o domaćoj gaming industriji. Stvarno je zanimljiv, čini mi se dosta bogatiji od prethodne 2 godine, a i konačno, kao što si rekla, imamo prosto prostora da poredimo iz godine u godinu, tako da u svakom slučaju mislim da svi jedva čekamo da ga zgrabimo, odnosno downloadujemo 5. aprila kada će biti dostupan na našem sajtu. A kakve to igre prave naši članovi na svim tim platformama, pogledajte u sledećem segmentu Trailer Park. Uživajte.
Rated T for Teen.
They promised us Deus, but they never let us in. So we live in columni, hoping one day to go up. Some dream of it. Some fight for it. But most simply don't care. But to go up, you must journey down. the inside, you must go outside. To go forward, you must go back. Deus, you must pass through Machina.
Poštovani gledaoci, ja sam Kristina Janković, a vi gledate SGA Vesti, novosti koje su obeležile godinu za nama. U toku minule godine 2,7 milijardi gejmera i gejmerki potrošilo je 170 milijardi dolara na igre. Tržište prelazi prag od neverovatnih 200 milijardi do 2023. Ovu godinu pamtit ćemo i po rastu industrije od čak 20% u svetu, a i kod nas. Novo Startup Genom istraživanje drugu godinu za redom podvlači da je gejming u Srbiji jedan od podsektora sa najvećim potencijalom. Od aprila 2020. godine svi iOS korisnici u Srbiji konačno imaju priliku da koriste App Store. Na raspolaganju su igre i aplikacije, možete koristiti svoju platnu karticu za sve transakcije, ali i druge servise. Da podsjetimo, ovo je veliki pomak za domaće developere video igara koji konačno mogu da objave igre direktno iz Srbije i kao takve ih promovišu uz mnogo veću vidljivost i lakšu naplatu. Ako se još uvek niste prebacili na App Store srpski, tamo vas čeka lista igara napravljenih u Srbiji. Prošle godine počeo je sa radom Naučno-tehnološki park Niš. Do sada smo imali prilike da se družimo sa aktivnom niškom zajednicom, a naši članovi kompanije Pixel, Webelinks, Sozab i Software Wolf već su stanari ovog IT centra. Nakon spektakularne demo najave Unreal Engine 5 stiglo je još dobrih vesti za indie developere. Prag za besplatno korišćenje licence za Unreal Engine 4 je sada na $1.000.000 zarade. U avgustu 2020. godine pokrenuta je platforma SGA Poslovi na kojoj se od tada nalaze sve aktuelne pozicije u gejming industriji Srbije. Ukoliko tražite posao u gejmingu, stručnjaci savjetuju da posetite stranicu www.sga.rs/poslovi. Pokrenuti su prvi Gaming Master programi u Srbiji u okviru programa Master 4.0. U Beogradu i Kragujevcu spajaće se umetnost i IT veštine za sve one koji želi da budu deo rastuće gaming industrije. Marija Ilić, suosnivačica beogradskog studija Two Desperados, našla se na globalnoj listi 100 Game Changers za 2020. godinu koju objavljuje GameBiz. Na listi su se našli ljudi koji su bili ključni za razvijanje tržišta, oni koji su radili na ujedinjavanju zajednica, ali pre svega oni čije priče pokazuju da gaming industrija može biti bolja. Celokupnu listu možete naći na sajtu Games Industry Biz. Embracer Group AB zvanično je kroz ćerku firmu Saber Interactive u novembru potpisao ugovor o akviziciji našeg člana i jednog od osnivača Madhead Games. Ovime se nastavlja niz uspešnih akvizicija koje na domaću scenu dovode najveće igrače gaming industrije sveta. Gledali ste SGA Vesti, hvala na pažnji i želim vam prijatan ostatak programa.
Woka Woka.
Za svakog po nešto. Ako do sada niste probali sve ove igre, nadamo se da smo vas zainteresovali. Praznici su pred nama, pa i pregršt vremena da ih isprobate. Sa nama je u studiju još jedan član tima, programski direktor SGA Relja Bobić. Nadamo se da ste ovih dana videli neke od najava za jedan veliki program koji spremamo. U pitanju je prvi međunarodni projekat pod nazivom Playing Narratives from Comics to Games. Relja, hoćeš li nam reći nešto više o tome?
Hvala ti, Mašo. Dakle, ono što je ovde negde za nas najbitnije je da je ovo za SGA zaista prvi po redu međunarodni projekat. U prilici smo da sarađujemo sa fenomenalnom listom partnera, pre svega Francuski institut i Goethe institut u Beogradu, dakle kulturna predstavništva ovih zemalja u Srbiji, koji zajedno sa SGA kao implementatorom projekta su inicirali celu ovu priču, a program je podržan od strane Francusko-Nemačkog kulturnog fonda, tako da odatle i ova specifična kombinacija partnera, a odatle proizilazi donekle i koncepcija samog programa, gde sa jedne strane želimo da neko nasleđe stripa i tih vizualnih narativa i crtanja, koje je naravno dosta jaka tradicija u Francuskoj, spojimo sa nekim savremenom kulturom interaktivnih medija i dakle da na neki način pokušamo da mlade stvaraoce iz različitih sfera okupimo zajedno, da sa istaknutim stručnjacima kako iz naših kompanija, dakle iz kompanija koje su članice SGA i drugi naši stručnjaci, pored francuskih i nemačkih, im tokom perioda od 8 meseci ponude jedno zaista kvalitetno iskustvo učenja i mentorstva, gde će, da kažem, neki finalni proizvod će biti koncepti za igre koje su bazirane na nekim postojećim stripovima koje će autori koji budu učestvovali u ovom programu na kojima zapravo verovatno već rade. Ono što je važno da pomenemo danas je da je otvoreni poziv za učešće u ovom projektu otvoren sve do kraja ove nedelje, dakle do nedelje 4. aprila u ponoć, tako da pozivamo sve strip crtače, animatore, ilustratore, kompjuterske modelare, ljude koji se bave kreativnim pisanjem ili možda čak i sound dizajnere, da se slobodno prijave. Imamo zaista široki raspon od 16 do 35 godina, dakle očekujemo i studente i mlade profesionalce i možda neki od vas koji se jednom od ovih oblasti bavite iz hobija, a ono što vas može očekivati u programu je da upoznate iznutra proces rada na jednoj video igri i naravno da sarađujete sa jako zanimljivim ljudima i uz to bit će tu i mnoštvo pogodnosti, obezbeđen radni prostor, svi mogući materijali, oprema i tako dalje, tako da zaista jedna odlična prilika i ono što nam je posebno drago je da su neke od članica, kompanije članica SGA prepoznale ovaj projekat, tako da kao generalnog pokrovitelja imamo iz Novog Sada kompaniju Digital Arrow, zatim istaknute sponzore Two Desperados i Trilateral kao deo Epic Games i takođe program sponzoriše i Ubisoft iz Beograda, a pored svih njih imamo i značajne partnere iz Nemačke i Francuske. U Nemačkoj je to Spielfabrik, akcelerator koji je konkretno posvećen gaming industriji i na kraju bih pomenuo organizaciju, odnosno školu za koju je vezano i jedno od dva gostujuća predavanja koja imamo čast da vam da ih večeras podelimo sa vama. Dakle, Engmin je škola koja se nalazi u gradu Agulenu u Francuskoj, takozvanom gradu stripa u kome je sve podređeno ovoj umetnosti i ovo je upravo i škola koja se bavi nekim savremenim tendencijama u domenu stripa kao i povezivanju stripa sa interaktivnim medijima. Tako da bih iskoristio ovu priliku da kao posebno jedno od dva gostujuća predavanja koje imamo večeras za vas, pre nego što je i sam projekat Playing Narratives zapravo počeo. To će biti Stephan Froment iz studija Asobo iz Francuske. Prethodno je radio i u Limbing Entertainment Group, tako da tema koju će on pokriti tiče se SCRUM-a, odnosno agilnih metoda u procesu razvoja video igara, tako da se nadamo da će za brojne indie studije ili neki od vas koji tek planirate da uđete u game dev vode, ovo biti zanimljivo, a nakon toga vas očekuje i još jedno gostujuće obraćanje iz Nemačke koje ćemo najaviti malo kasnije. Tako da uživajte u narednih oko pola sata u predavanju Stephana Fromenta.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to SCRUM and video game project management, ingredients of a successful love drama. I'm Stephan Froment. I will be your guide through this journey into SCRUM, Agile method, video game production, and all that jazz. So no need to waste more time. We can go straight away into the main topic. So one second. Okay, here we are. So Ingredients of a successful love drama. Just before we start, a short introduction on my side. I'm Stephan Froment. As aforementioned, I was a former psychologist, 8 years as researcher and clinical psychologist in various institutions. And then I did a job conversion to become a producer. 4 years in the serious game field, 5 years in AA studio in Germany, and since a bit more than 1 year, I am producer on flight sim at Asobo in France. I would say in heroic fantasy, I would give the closest character to a mage warrior with these balanced roles. No, in terms of method, because this is also one of the topics we are going to discuss today. What is my methodology background? As I have just mentioned, I was a researcher in psychology and criminology. I have also a PMP certification since 2014. For the ones who don't know this, this is a method of methods. This is a topic we will discuss shortly later. It's about the framework in order to make things happen in a way. In terms of agile method, I am pretty fond of Scrum, even though I have no certification in this regard. But this is also a point we will discuss later. The fact that I have no formal Scrum certification is actually a good asset in order to talk about it. This is a specific point we will develop. So, Scrum approach and video game project management. Let's start with the nice things about this, the honeymoon. And some basics about video game. As we all know, it's about iteration to feed creativity. And it's about a media which is non-linear, requiring lots of effort, joint effort, and mainly multidisciplinary, which is pretty awesome and crazy, but implies also lots of communication and lots of ideas to move forward, as well as it has to answer and to address some, let's say, strong expectations in terms of time, cost, and quality, of course. In other words, we could say that video game production is not that much of getting the right idea or good ideas, because we know lots of people with crazy ideas, but it's about the means to make it happen. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint, actually, even though we are going to discuss about what is a sprint later. So at the end of the day, method and methodology is required. But Scrum, because Scrum is no kind of a big standards in our industry, and whatever the size of the studio or company you are working for. It was created in the mid-80s in a non-video game related context, and it has been applied since then, of course, on video game, but not only, on plenty of other product development, mainly softwares. This so-called method is pretty good for innovation, for incrementing things, for giving and pushing visibility on a work in process. It's a simple framework for complex development. Long story short, it's about getting a daily routine with specific processes, giving oneself a time in order to produce something on which we will iterate. And between two iterations, we can revamp, we can update the backlog of the same product. So it's a pretty strong approach in this regard and based on iteration expectation. And of course, according to this, it has some specific values promoted, like courage, focus, commitment, respect, openness. What you have to keep in mind, if you are not already aware about this, is that this process, this approach, this method is maybe less flexible as it would sound with Agile, because A, it's focused on group dynamics, B, in order to make something real happen. So if we do a quick recap, on the one hand, we have what the video game needs: joint effort, iteration, and keeping the scope and the content under control, and empirism. It has to exist at the end of the day. And on the other side, you have the Scrum benefits. Scrum, literally, it means people together, a strong togetherness. Of course, this iterative approach I have just described, the fact that it involves the client, which should, in theory, decrease significantly the delta or the risk of gap between what was expected and what will happen at the end. And also, according to this, a working application. We need to see what is produced. So at the end of the day, and at first sight, video game and Scrum, yeah, it has everything of a true love case. But if it's too nice to be true, maybe it's not true. And now we have to focus on the love drama aspect of this love story. And it has to be linked with the video game specifics. Because if we are talking about video game industry, we are talking about companies. And for this, we can distinguish globally three categories of companies. Of course, we have the indie developers, small and flexible, small teams, projects, budgets, and flexible in terms of deadline, at least as long as you have money for your project. Then you have double A, medium, big, bigger team, bigger budget, less flexibility, innovation. The scope is most often given and the time pretty rigid. The double A means, the next step is the triple A, and by extension, the 4 A's. We are talking about huge teams, even sometimes co-development with studios on different countries. Time and budget in this regard could be problematic, but are rarely a problem because the focus is on quality. But for the same reason, the scope can explode. So, on the one hand, we have indie with a pretty good scope in terms of iteration. The perfect team size for Scrum, it's a small team, but low budget, and we can really question the Scrum baselines. Then we have a double A. The team size is still okay. We can split the team, we can organize a bit more effort, but this is still something that can match the Scrum approach. The time is hard to move. The lines are pretty fixed. The scope, it's pretty hard to afford to move this. And in terms of budget, it's pretty often or always a given one with but a specific business case with no room for change. And again, same problem. The team is bigger, so we can really question or educated in terms of Scrum, the people and the stakeholders are. And on the other hand, the AAA or 4 A's configuration with, okay, time and budget pretty open for iteration, with the risk or at the expense of the scope most of the time. The team size is pretty gigantic and not compatible with Scrum at first sight. And again, no, the size is so big that the baselines in terms of Scrum are really challenging, to say the least. So after this pretty nice start, what we can see is that we have a different set of constraints. And one common Scrum requirement missing. That is to say, people knowing what is Scrum and how to use Scrum and used to the vocabulary and the wording and the concepts of Scrum. In other words, there is a strong need to evangelize. So need to take some time on top of what is planned for the project. In terms of reservation, the video game needs joint endeavor, iteration, scope under control, and empirism, or even pragmatism. The Scrum benefits, okay, we can work together pretty close, we can iterate pretty often, we involve the partners and the client, and we will give ourselves the mean of what we want with a working application. But the video game specifics are pretty challenging. The team size can vary in a very wide way from one company to another one. There will be always deadlines, milestones to enforce and respect, and the scope can go from something pretty fixed to absolutely non-defined. On top, we are pretty sure that in any companies, there will be a strong need to educate people at what is Scrum in order to avoid some easy traps. Like Scrum is improvisation. No, actually, Scrum is not improvisation. That means at the end of the day that the reality of a video game studios and the demanding nature of Scrum on the reverse of what it could seem imply that we are more in a limited scope of feasibility and in the illusion of a method rather than an achievement in this regard. And most of the time, at least related to my experience, studios claim they are using Scrum without using Scrum because they don't know or the environment doesn't allow them to do so. So it's no more the love at first sight situation, but more the arranged marriage case. Does it mean we need to give up? Necessarily not. There is always workaround and a trade-off. And actually, it's not because Scrum by the book doesn't fit exactly the video game context, but everything is to throw away. But for sure, there is a risk of studio collapse or production dangers there, because what I have just described is the fact that most of the time we are claiming to use a method which is not systematically relevant in a context which is not appropriate, based on the lack of expertise, yes, unfortunately, leading to bad habits and wrong practices, even without the awareness of it, and based on the very initial will to reassure everybody, like hell is paved with goodwill. In other words, there is a need for alternative ways and workarounds. And there are some tips in this regard. The first one about acceptance. And this is exactly what we are doing in a way. It means that, of course, Scrum is demanding, but in a way, and everybody does so actually, there is no need to stick to Scrum by the book at any cost. We can refer to Scrum because this is, let's say, a common reference. But everybody liking Scrum doesn't mean that everybody knows Scrum. And since it's an open secret, the best thing to do is still to accept to do Scrum by yourself, and then to identify the different parameters I have mentioned just before, the set of constraints. What are the habits of a studio in terms of method? What is the flexibility in terms of expertise, of educating, training people? What is the history of a studio in this regard? Related to a project, is there already a budget, a timeline, etc., etc., etc.? It's about spotting all the parameters and start to claim the Scrum adjustment needs in your situation, not just importing Scrum as it is and trying to paste it on an already existing organization, but trying to merge the best of it with the existing and identifying the resistances. Then ends the second tip, adaptation. We have just to remember the main benefits of Scrum, and we are going to develop them. It's about values and it's about tools. In this regard, we have to be picky. What I mean this way is that since we have to choose the best related to our environment, which is also related to the size of a team, the size of a project, the configuration of a company, the category of a company, the market targeted, etc., 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 you will have to choose the right site or the right parameters within the Scrum method, and to pair it with the right means. That is to say, the toolbox, the Scrum toolbox. You have to take your pick, in other words. Concrete. It is okay, definitely, with Scrum, whatever the environment is. Sticking to Agile manifesto, that is to say, highlighting the people rather than the processes, getting a working application, accepting the changes, and working with a client, a close collaboration. This is okay. This is a strong asset in order to, let's say, support a vision. What is also good is that it can help to focus on the team dynamics, the group dynamics. Scrum is really about this togetherness. And on top, we will see with the tools, you can also aim for short and mid-term visibility. These goals are provided by the Scrum method and by the tools we are going to see, and are totally fine whatever the context is. What is definitely less relevant is to try to use Scrum really by the book and to go full or pure iteration, which is somehow at the opposite of the life cycle of a video game, which is, let's say, most of the time a Y cycle. Lots of iteration in the very beginning to define the core mechanics, then the first prototype. Once this is safe and secured, going into more kind of a waterfall approach in order to get the first visibility, iterate less and less on some parameters, no jeopardizing or trying not to compromise the existing core game loop, etc., 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 to deliver the game at the end. You can go pure iteration, but in a really specific cases. R&D, porting, if you are working on a new technology, but otherwise, there is no need to reinvent the wheel in this regard. Or you are in the situation of Blizzard 10, 20 years ago with unlimited budget, and this is okay. Another trap which should not be disregarded is the team size. Yeah, 6 people, 2 times 6 people, etc., etc., but not 120, 150. Scrum is not thought and not created for this kind of size and measures. But if you want to hire an army of project managers and to refactor all the institution you are working, but the values and the goals was one thing, and now the means to get there. Super easy things to use with a bit of training and education in the beginning. Daily stand-up meeting, review and retrospective, the Scrum poker planning, different roles, the vision owner, the responsible for the method, the developers, backlog, really important. So little documentation, lots of communication, and dedicated time and space to make it happen. We are talking about building long-term through short-term. And this is okay. We have secured the day, the man, but we are not really talking about the long-term visibility and guidance, schedule, cost, milestones. Hence, the third tip related to the guidelines and the need to combine with other methods. Once an agile routine is set, there is necessarily a need for complementary approaches and monitoring. As I have said, the monitoring and the complementary approach maybe would not be required if we could apply Scrum by the book entirely, which is not the case. So with, let's say, only part of Scrum used, it will be, there will be some blanks and some holes to fill. Hence the need for complementary approaches. And with my experience, I would go for two main approaches. For KPIs, the PMI approach. This is the certification I was mentioning in the very beginning of the speech, for the mid-long-term visibility. And the more, let's say, basic and efficient make it happen approach to enforce deliveries and to close the project, waterfall. At some point, we switch to this naturally, because at the end of the day, we will have to deliver. Again, the idea is to leave nobody and nothing behind this way. A quick word on the PMBOK, which is the Bible, the book of knowledge from the PMI approach. I am talking about the PMI approach because I am certified in this one, but I could have mentioned Prince2, Six Sigma, and so forth and so more. There is a large, let's say, variety of methods and tools you can use in order to find the good match with your use of Scrum. Kanban method, etc. The lean approach. You have also servant management. It could be a full presentation in order to explore all the opportunities in terms of methodology. What is good with this approach is that you can go through lots of processes, process groups, knowledge areas, and you can adjust them related to other methods. As I have mentioned in the beginning, the PMI approach and the PMP certification, it's about a method of a method. So it's totally okay and compatible with lots of other. There is no parasiting or no interference between them. But again, which is not okay, is that it's not about enforcing a methodology to the letter. It's not doing by the book, but again, picking the right fights in order to find the right and the smooth balance between methodologies. Otherwise, you will end up in spending your time updating Excel's projects or preparing a presentation and not actually working on the project. And you will be tempted to hire an army of producers to create the illusion of safety by update of documents. Updating documents, it's totally fine, but it's not the ultimate goal. Short example of 10 processes I have used and I keep using for some of them. 10 within the 49 likely to be used. You can decrease this to 3 if you are alone. You can go to 10 if you have 2 associate producers. Again, it's a question of an intuitive application of them with a good match with the existing method you have picked, if this is a Scrum, and what are the most convenient to give you the visibility on the long term and on the good run of your project. Or as I have written, it's about safeguards processes in order to secure the progression through indexes. I will not go into details, but it's just to give you kind of an idea. The project charter is the idea of a project. The scope statement is an agreement with the client about the contents you want to enforce. Of course, milestone delivery list. It's most of the time even contractual parameter. You will have KPIs, that is to say, schedule performance index, cost performance index, etc., etc. Things complicated, things easy. Again, the main thing is that since your environment will be really wide with various parameters, you have to adjust your method with the same accuracy and to pick the right tool for the right visibility. So at the end, it's not the love at first sight, but a combination of convenient tools, the SCRUM for the group dynamics and the short-term mastery, PMI, Prince2, or any other method in order to set processes, to spot interdependencies, and to keep a good visibility on the long term, and waterfall to enforce work sequences and match specific discipline workflow. For instance, SCRUM is not really thought and useful for artists, for animation, for mocap. For these disciplines, for these departments, you have something which is pretty well defined with a beginning and an end, and you have just to go through the workflow. You have just to respect the pipeline. We are no more talking about SCRUM by the book, but by the tools. And this can be encapsulated in a flow of processes. You have just to pay attention to make them the less intrusive possible. So there is no love at first sight, and it's not a arranged marriage, but we could consider that it's a marriage of convenience at the end. And I thank you for your attention.
Evo nas ponovo u studiju i govorimo o programu Playing Narratives, dakle prvom međunarodnom programu u kome učestvuje i koji realizuje SGA u Srbiji. Nadamo se da vam je da su vam tema i predavač bili zanimljivi. Stefan bi trebalo, dakle, pre kraja ove godine da održi jednu radionicu za učesnike ovog programa, tako da ću iskoristiti priliku još jednom da vas podsjetim, pozovem da do nedelje 4. aprila u ponoć se prijavite za učešće u Playing Narratives programu koji će trajati sve do kraja ove godine, tako da zaista pregršt aktivnosti je pred nama i ono što nam je drago je da ćemo dobar deo tih predavanja moći da podelimo sa vama, sa širom zajednicom, ne samo sa 15-ak učesnika, odabranih učesnika programa koji će ga pratiti do kraja. I za pred sam kraj ovog prvog SGA Assemble događaja ili emisije, kako god pogledate, koja će, nadamo se, postati naše redovno obraćanje zajednici svakog aprila, kada ćemo moći da predstavimo uvek i novi izveštaj i dosta zanimljivih informacija i gostiju. Biće, dakle, obraćanje veterana zaista gaming industrije koji dolazi iz Nemačke. U pitanju je Hendrik. On je možda za nas iz SGA dosta bitan kao i predsednik upravnog odbora IGDF-a, odnosno Evropske takozvane asocijacija, čiji je član i SGA, ali naravno mnogo pre toga on je već decenijama uspešno u gaming vodama i umešan je u operacije i u rad, ja mislim, 10-ak gaming kompanija, a pre svega svega naravno Remote Control Productions, dakle njegova firma, Chimera Entertainment koja je radila na nekim od Angry Birds igrica i zaista još mnogo drugih inicijativa, gaming kompanija i relevantnih događaja koji se održavaju ne samo u Evropi nego i širom sveta. Hendrik nekako uvek uspe da umeša svoje prste tu i da nešto donese neku zanimljivu vrednost. Tako da za kraj jedno kratko obraćanje sa njegove strane koje se nadamo da će motivisati mnogi od vas koji ste na početku ili tek planirate da se bavite profesionalno gamingom i kroz simpatično naslovljenu prezentaciju From Nerd to Entrepreneur Hendrik će vam preneti deo svog bogatog iskustva. Uživajte.
Hey guys, I'm very happy to be here today and give a little overview on where I'm coming from, a little bit of background, and hopefully it will inspire you to become great game developers in the future. So obviously you already kind of know who I am, but let me say something about me. I've been a nerd since I was like, I think forever, but really it started when I was 4 years old. My dad introduced me to computers. It's way back in the early 80s, so we were extremely early adopters of PCs, and I started playing there. My dad always wanted me to code, but I was more interested in the games themselves, and I loved it. I started to love games, comic books, sci-fi, fantasy, was always reading a lot, so I always very much felt like what we would call a nerd. Back in the days, that was not necessarily a positive connotation. Now it is. In my opinion, this century is a century of nerds. We kind of already co-rule the world if you look at Amazon and Google and all those kind of companies and some of the extremely growing gaming companies too. But I think games as a culture technique is such a powerful force for so many things. It's not just for entertainment, as you know, you have a little bit of fun, you do some escapism, as we call it, where you basically get out of what's called the physical reality and just enjoy yourself in kind of a dreamy world. Then there is, of course, opportunities to learn. There's opportunities to mingle, to have a social life there, which was especially interesting during Corona. I think nowadays, really everybody understands the power of games as a culture technique and the power of games to bring people together. And this is why I'm so happy to be able to speak to you here today, because you are the next wave, right? You are in education right now. You're pondering what to do in life. And I'm here to tell you there is so many things you can do in gaming. So many things where you can take your passion, your interest for technology, for games, for art, for culture, and in my opinion, games are the most modern form of culture and to express yourself in art. And I really want to show you that you can do this not only if you are a coder, not only if you are a great game designer, or you don't need to study business. I studied philosophy. I think that was a great basis for me to, first of all, think, be sharp in the moment, to also understand who I am, what I want in life, and especially what can be done in life and what can be the impact of a single person on all of humanity and all of history. So I'm epic like this when I try to explain it to you, because this is how I feel, and this is why I'm doing my job. Us forming the remote control family more than 16 years ago was not just a business rationale. It was coming out of my guts. It was coming out of my heart. And I'm so happy that I found colleagues and allies over all those years to do it with me together. It is really about empowering developers to be able to focus on the development, to be able to focus on the development of great cultural impact games or others which are just entertainment, which is basically also very nice and totally respectable, to make serious games. So we worked with Ministry of Defense. We worked with the organization in Germany which helps the youth to search for new jobs and stuff like this. This is important to me. This is what the power of games can actually bring to the table, that you can tackle interesting challenges and interesting missions with what's called games as a culture technique. You might wonder, games, play and all this kind of stuff sounds all, a little bit childish still for some people. In my opinion, and please think about it, even games as a description, as a name, is not necessarily ideal. It's a bit misleading, and it has been misleading for decades, because a lot of people who never played games, who never, took the effort to dive in, kind of always thought, yeah, it's childish, right? Games are for kids and all this kind of stuff. It is not. If you think of the term play is also the term for drama and all this. This is one of the oldest culture techniques there is in humanity. It's very clear that people, even going back to the Stone Age, were already imitating each other, having forms of play. And this is also how you learn languages. So your parents show you something, you try to then do it again. That's all kind of forms of play. So intellectually, games is not bad. Games doesn't have a bad connotation, but in reality, it does. Still, maybe that changes, and I'm pretty sure it will over time. But maybe it's also fair to think of games a little bit more broadly. And as I said already a couple of times, as a culture technique. So it's not just for the PC people to do games they played back in the days. It's all great, but this is one aspect. Or for the serious games people to make all serious. What a bad description of a very cool thing. But it is here to help basically everybody. During Corona, there's a couple of games I call Corona games. Among Us is a Corona game. Fall Guys is a Corona game. Valheim is a Corona game. All of them were especially amplified because we sit at home with our asses and we miss social interaction. And those games are helping us with this kind of social interaction, to feel connected, to feel together, to even have a little bit of purpose. We playing Valheim at the moment with some of our colleagues, and I dug a lot of holes and moats around our fortress, and so it even gives, in difficult times like this, it gives us a sense of purpose. You might argue, what the fuck, man? Who cares if you build a moat about your fortress? I do, and my colleagues in the game do. So this is why it's meaningful. Because in the end, this idea of, the one thing is real, the other is virtual, doesn't make any sense. Both of it is real. One is physical, the other is virtual. So if you ever find someone, even now still during your university time, who tells you, yeah, it's only virtual, blah, 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 show them the finger and tell them that they didn't really think through it. That, of course, if you go back in philosophy and argue what really reality is, and what are the choices we can do as human beings, if you do not really understand that the virtual reality is also real and can establish social interactions and friendships and all that kind of stuff, in my opinion, you're plainly an idiot. And if you're an idiot who's just wasn't exposed to it before, and have a discussion with someone else, and then you think about it and you grow, totally fine. Then you're a clever idiot because you overcome that ignorance. But if you just stay in your little silo and think, this is how I see things and this is how it should be, then you stay an idiot. And that would be really sad. And I hope all of you don't want to stay idiots if you are, or, basically grow as human beings. First of all, of course, through education, you get empowered. And then ideally, you also emancipate, because us empowering you is a little bit condescending, if you're honest. So in the end, it's a push. It's a help for you to emancipate yourself, to think on your own, to make decisions on your own, to make choices in life. Ideally, you becoming game entrepreneurs, game designers, game developers, whatever, but ideally, of course, in this context, connected to games. But please do it as conscious and as aware and as driven by you as possible, because you're the future, you're the younglings, the Padawans. I'm a mild Star Wars fan, so to say. So take those opportunities you have and be ambitious, be bold. And if you ever need to bounce something off, you will find me on social media. Go interact with me, interact with all the other professors, people who come and visit your location to help you, to guide you. Don't let them necessarily lead you, but accept that they can guide you and support you. So again, in my summary, games are the culture technique of the century. Take all these opportunities out there. Do what you think you have to do from your guts of who you are, and use games for good. Be constructive and keep on gaming. Thanks a lot for being here and enjoy the show. Cheers.
Dragi gledalci, hvala vam mnogo što ste danas odvojili vreme za ovaj mali showcase domaćeg gaminga i proslavili sa nama 3. rođendan SGA. Nadamo se da vam je bilo korisno i zabavno i da ste naučili nešto novo o kreatorima igara iz Srbije. Pratite dalje SGA aktivnosti, pišite nam i pitajte nas sve što vas zanima. Posebno hvala i sjajnom timu iz Fortune koji nas je ugostio večeras u njihovom studiju. Gledamo se i sledećeg proleća na novom SGA Assemble događaju. Vidimo se.